Hello and welcome to today's episode. I am Dr. Arshia Hussain and teaching in the Department of Commerce and Business Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today we will discuss about liberalization and privatization. So let us start first of all with the concept of liberalization. The term liberalization means when there are no legal restrictions to enter the foreign market. In other words, liberalization implies no rigid rules and regulations for doing business abroad. It means that the government will remove all trade barriers to enter the foreign market. Liberalization refers to a proportion of prior government restriction, generally in such areas of social and economic policy. Liberalization is one of the ways to improve the efficiency of public units, that is PSU. According to M. Dhanuja, liberalization is related to that state of economic conditions in which rules, regulations and controls are eliminated to promote competition. Another definition given by Ahluwalia, the most important changes have related to reducing the domestic barriers to entry and expansion to inject a measure of competition in industry, simplifying the procedures and providing easier access to better technology and intermediate material import, as well as more flexibility in the use of installed capacity with a view to enable easier supply responses to changing demand conditions. Thus, we can say that liberalization is an economic process in which various regulations and controls are liberalized to reform economic conditions of the country. Now we will see need of liberalization. Liberalization policy was adopted by the government for the development of industrial sector in the economy because of the following reasons. The first reason is to improve the standard of living. Globalization and the removal of restrictions help to provide people with good and cheap goods. In some cases, it increases employment opportunities and thus improves the standard of living. Second one is to speed up the industrial development. The new industrial policy has significantly reduced the intervention barriers for the entry of national and foreign investors, resulting in a much more competitive environment in the industrial sector. This competitive environment was expected to lead to higher growth rates in the industrial sector. The third one is to attain economic globalization. Globalization means the integration of the country's economy into the world economy. Globalization is the liberalization of trade in goods and services that has resulted in an unprecedented expansion of international trade. Fourth one is to attain competitive industrial environment. A greater emphasis on the control and regulation of monopoly, restrictive and unfair business practices will curb the anti-competitive behavior of companies in ineffective monopoly and competitive markets, thus promoting competition and efficiency. Fifth one is to control the wastage of resources. Closing, liquidating or rehabilitating weak public facilities means that resources are used more productively. Sixth one is to increase employment. If a country advances and increases its production, employment opportunities increase. Liberalization trends would increase employment opportunities and reduce the increase in unemployment. Seventh one is to control inflation. Liberalization would increase the production of capital and consumer goods. It will check for inflation. Now we will see effects of liberalization on the Indian economy. The main effects and achievements of liberalization policy are as follows. First one is private and foreign investment. Liberalization increased the scope of private and foreign investment in the industrial sector. The expansion plans of many Indian companies, both in the public and private sectors, have increased substantially. Second point is increased sales. Many industries are seeing tremendous growth in their sales output. Some of the industries have been producing luxury goods, vehicles and automobiles. Higher production results in increased sales and thereby providing employment opportunities to many Indians. Third one is increased competitiveness and industrialization. In the course of liberalization, the industry has become stronger and more competitive in national and international markets. In recent years, both sales and profits have increased from Indian companies to a great extent. Fourth one is foreign investment. Liberalization has helped in boosting foreign direct investment in India. Significant investment is required to accelerate the growth rate of the Indian economy. Domestic savings were not enough in our country, but liberalization has helped boost foreign direct investment in India. Now we will have a look at the recent trends in liberalization. Keeping in view liberalization measures announced in the year 1980s, the government announced a new industrial policy in the year 1991. The new policy deregulates the industrial economy to a large extent. The main objective of the new policy was to free the Indian industrial economy from the unnecessary bureaucratic control, introduce liberalization with a view to integrate the Indian economy into the world economy, remove restrictions on FDI and domestic entrepreneurs from the restrictions of the MRTP Act. Furthermore, industrial policy reforms resulted in the government taking a series of policy initiatives in the following ways. First one is the 1991 industrial policy abolished industrial licenses for all but 18 industries. Eventually, most of them as well have obtained licenses. Currently, licensing is only mandatory for 5 industries. The government has also announced its intention to offer part of the state participation in public sector companies, mutual funds, financial institutions, the public and factories. In 1991 to 92, it began in this direction with the sale of part of the shares of selected public companies. The new industrial policy shows the government's intention to involve the private sector more in key areas of the economy. Second one is abolition of industrial licenses for all projects except a short list of industries related to strategic and safety issues, social reasons, hazardous chemicals and elite and environmental priority. Consumer goods industries that are reserved for the small sector will continue to be so reserved. The compulsory licensing provisions would not apply to small lots that are dedicated to the production of items reserved for the exclusive production of the small scale sector. Under the MRTP Act, all companies with assets above a certain size, that is rupees 100 million since 1985, were classified as MRTP companies. These companies were only allowed to enter selected areas of the industries. In addition to business license control, these large companies required separate permits for investment proposals. Therefore, the new industrial policy has removed the threshold limit for assets relative to MRTP and dominant companies. These companies will now be at par with others and will not require prior government approval to invest in unlicensed industries. The MRTP law has been amended accordingly. Fourth one is separate investment limits are prescribed for manufacturing companies. A micro enterprise is one in which investments in machinery and equipment do not exceed 25 lakhs. A small company is one in which investments in machinery and equipment exceed 25 million euros but do not exceed 5,000 million euros, and a medium-sized company is one in which investments in machinery and equipment exceed 5,000 million euros but not to exceed 10 billion. Next is the government introduced the partial convertibility of the rupee in the 1992 to 93 budget, known as the Liberalized Exchange Rate Management System, that is LERMS. In 1993, it followed a market-driven exchange rate regime. The exchange rate is now largely determined by the market. However, the Reserve Bank intervenes to curb excessive market volatility. Such an exchange rate regime is known as the managed float regime. In the year 1992, SEBI became a public corporation. It has been empowered to regulate all commercial banks in relation to issuing activity, issue guidelines, and supervise and regulate the operation of mutual funds and oversee the operation of the Indian stock exchanges. The Indian government has been allowing Indian companies access since 1992 in international capital markets through shares in euros. The Indian government has also liberalized investment rules for NRIs, allowing NRIs and foreign companies to buy stocks and bonds without prior approval from the RBI. Next is, in several cases, the government relaxed its majority ownership policy and granted tax breaks on the tax structure of individuals and businesses. The government reduced excise tax rates as well as direct and indirect taxes. Next is, now the government is inviting the private sector to public services. The private sector is welcome in public services such as water and electricity supply, construction of roads and bridges, telecommunications, banking services, insurance, and so on. Next is, since 1991, the government's strategy has placed the development of efficient infrastructure and the creation of an enabling environment as a high priority for private investment in the infrastructure sector. The government has announced tax exemptions for companies that develop, maintain and operate infrastructure facilities such as roads, bridges, new airports and rail projects, but also for those that deal with water supply, sewerage and sewerage projects. The Government of India has automatically approved foreign capital investments of up to 74% in key infrastructure industries such as power generation and transmission and unconventional power generation. Next is, the government introduced FEMA instead of FERA in the year 1999 because FERA was inconsistent with the changing time. FERA, on the other hand, was introduced to promote the orderly development and maintenance of the foreign exchange market in India. The new industrial policy of 1991 thus showed a new era of liberalization. As industrial licenses were abolished, the role of the public sector was diluted, foreign investment was encouraged, and incentives and initiatives were given to the private sector to expand their business activities. Next is objectives of liberalization. The objectives of liberalization are, first one, to improve performance, to accelerate industrial development, for better utilization of capabilities, to achieve economies of scale. Next is to reduce and in some cases eliminate procedural obstacles, to develop backward areas, to encourage export promotion and import substitution, to increase competitiveness and guarantee of healthy competition in industries. Now we will discuss about privatization. Privatization is the process of transferring a company or industry from the public sector to the private sector. The transfer of property or business from the state to the private sector is known as privatization. Privatization is the transformation of ownership or management from the public sector to the private sector, that is, the transformation of public companies into private companies. These companies are privately controlled and managed. According to Barber, Lee and John Nellis, privatization is the general process of involving the private sector in the ownership or operation of a state-owned enterprise. Thus, the term refers to private purchase of all or part of a public sector company. It covers contracting out and the privatization of management through management contracts, leases or franchise arrangements. According to Professor D.R. Pensay, privatization is a process that reduces the involvement of the state on the public sector in the national economic activities. According to Dr. A. Peter, privatization is the transfer of function or activity or organization from public to the private sector. According to Viren J. Shah, privatization means economic democracy. Thus, privatization is the process of establishing economic democracy, which includes passing of ownership right of public sector enterprise to private sector. Now, we will see the objectives of privatization. The main objectives of privatization are: first one, to improve the performance of public sector undertakings, that is PSUs, to reduce the financial burden on taxpayers. Second, to reduce the government intervention in the economy. The third one is to promote more private initiative. Fourth one is to promote broader share ownership. Fifth one is to develop the capital market. Sixth one, to foster competition and to reduce the administrative burden on the state. Next is to increase the size and dynamism of the private sector. Next is to increase efficiency, then to encourage and facilitate private sector investment from national and foreign sources. To reduce the risk of loss, to provide customers with better quality and services. Next, we will discuss privatization of Indian economy. The following steps have been taken to privatize the Indian economy. First one is disinvestment of public sector undertakings share capital. 5 to 20% of the shares of public units are sold to financial institutions, public institutions, employees and mutual funds. Disinvestment could hardly exert control over PSUs. Next is sick industries policies. To address the problem of occupational diseases, the government established the Board for Industrial and Financial Reconstruction, that is BIFR, under the Sick Industrial Companies Act of 1985. It can give the company in question an amount of reasonable time to positively develop your net worth, or you may dissolve the business. Third one is private sector insurance companies. The Indian market is now open to private insurance companies. There are currently at least 13 private insurance companies operating in India. Fourth one is disinvestment of public sector companies. Ownership of public companies is diluted through the sale of 26% of the shares of public sector companies to private sector ownership. Next is reorganization of the public sector. The reorganization of the public sector is the modernization and privatization of companies. Next is association of the private sector. The government has allowed the investment of the private sector in certain sectors, important areas to be opened up to private investment, including fuel, electricity, transportation, communications and security. Next is reduction in the size of the public sector. The role of the public sector envisaged in the industrial policy of 1956 would be limited to only 4 industries, and more areas would be open to the private sector. Next is Memorandum of Understanding. The Government of India has signed a Memorandum of Understanding, that is MOU, with several UPMs. The main objective of MOU is to strike a balance between autonomy and responsibility. Next topic we'll discuss is the advantages of privatization. The advantages of privatization in India are: first one, increased competition and reduced monopoly. Monopoly means sole seller in the market. In earlier days, the public sectors were only sellers in the market. With the advent of privatization, the monopoly of the public sector was reduced to a great extent. Second one is revitalized health rooms. After privatization, many public health rooms will be revitalized and restructured. Privatization helped revitalize hospital wards that are passive of the public sector. The third one is efficient management. Privatization helped in increasing the efficiency of the management. The private sectors are doing more work and they need well-trained talent, and they are embracing new products and looking for new things. Fourth one is rapid industrial growth. Privatization could help solve the state's financial crisis in the light of a new industrial democracy. Privatization invests more money and achieves high industrial growth and also affects the economy as a whole. Fifth is increased efficiency of energy supply. It is one of the main advantages of privatization. It means competition between the public sector and the private sector. Public sector compete with private sectors and also increase the efficiency of energy supplies. Next is promotion of innovation and investment. Privatization promotes innovation. By innovation, we mean looking for something new and adopting new ideas and techniques. Privatization also encourages investment. Investors invest more investments and help in the development of industries. Next is it promotes globalization. Privatization contributes to globalization. It encourages inquisitive people to globalize. Now, next we will discuss about the disadvantages of privatization. The main difficulties or disadvantages of privatization in India are: first one is fear of unemployment. The fear of retrenchment and consequent unemployment is all the more as there is no safety net scheme for labor worth the name. In any case, VRS is no solution of unemployment. According to Joseph Stiglitz, moving people for low productivity jobs in state enterprises leads to unemployment, does not increase a country's income, and it certainly does not increase the welfare of the workers. The situation is more serious in those cases where a public sector undertaking is sold to a foreign company, as the foreign company will be more interested in maximizing the stock market value for its shareholders rather than providing welfare facilities and doing for the interest of the local labor. The second one is emphasize on non-priority industries. An important criticism of the privatization is that it has helped in the expansion of consumer goods industries having low priority. These goods were meant to satisfy the consumption needs of elitist groups, but they yield quick profits. In a sense, not only the long-term requirements of the economy have been ignored, but the economic development of the country in the social desirable channels has been hampered. Next is threat from foreign competition. The process of globalization and integration of the economy with the world economy has led to an unequal competition, a competition between MNCs and Indian enterprises. Due to liberalization, the private sector welcomed the measures of the government, but it soon came to be realized that opening up the Indian economy to foreign competition is not for only more and cheaper imports and more foreign investment, but also to provide opportunities to the MNCs to search and take over their enterprises. Next is inefficiency of private sector. Another more serious problem is that the private sector, which is supposed to improve upon the performance of the PSUs, may not come up to the mark. This situation arises from the fact that the private sector too has not performed satisfactorily in a large measure, having lived for long under the umbrella of protection and with a captive domestic market. The private units have little to show in respect of factor of productivity, as shown by a rising input-output ratio. Thus, a mere change of ownership will not bring about the much desired increase in productivity. Next, we will see suggestions for the success of privatization. In the view of the difficulties mentioned to you just now, it is very clear that privatization, in the sense of transferring the ownership of public sector undertakings, that is PSUs, to the private sector, will have to be a limited extent. The following measures are suggested for the privatization in India. The first one is foreign capital investment should be mainly accepted for export promotions. Higher technology and infrastructural facilities should be promoted. Establishment of industries related to luxury goods should be discouraged. There should be uniform administrative control and taxation system throughout the country. Next is privatization should be promoted to reduce regional imbalance. Third one, there should be a comprehensive strategy for the privatization for the different categories of public enterprises. Next is privatization of only those units should be undertaken which will increase efficiency and productivity and reduce the burden on the budget resources and lead to import of technology without affecting national interest. Next is the proceeds of this investment should not be used to bridge the budget deficit, but instead should be placed in separate funds to be used for returning public debts, restructuring PSUs, developing the social infrastructure and voluntary retirement schemes, that is VRS schemes. Next is, once a PSU is privatized, the government is deprived of the future yields from this enterprise. This could be a large long-term loss in the case of the profit-generating PSUs. This point should be considered for the government's disinvestment program. Next is, the process of privatization has to be implemented with vigor and process should be monitored very well. Next is, in order to conduct the privatization smoothly, it is necessary to educate the public about the wisdom of these measures. Thus, we can say that the process of privatization may be adopted to promote economic and technological efficiency. A significant section of our society is opposed to privatization for a variety of reasons. Dr. V. Ramanathan places the issue in a very succinct manner. In the view of the historical background of public enterprise in India, it is inconceivable that privatization in this very country will be accepted by the society as an end in itself, since there is no consensus in favor of market solutions and property rights, nor are these considered as prime movers for much needed social and economic change. The real issues emphasize on the elevation of poverty and the upgrading of technology in the economy. This implies that privatization will have to be viewed essentially as the best possible means of achieving predetermined ends and ensuring that it does not distort the parameters of such ends. Now, we will see the measures which are proposed for privatization in India. The following measures are proposed for privatization in India. Number one, foreign capital investment should be accepted primarily for export promotion. Superior technologies and infrastructure should be promoted. The establishment of industries related to luxury goods should be discouraged. Second one is, there should be a uniform administrative and fiscal control system throughout the country. Third one is privatization should be encouraged to reduce regional imbalances. The fourth one is there should be a comprehensive privatization strategy for the different categories of the public companies. Fifth one is only those units that increase their functionality and productivity, reduce the budget burden and lead to the importation of technology without prejudice to national interest should be privatized. Next is the proceeds of the disinvestment should not be used to cover the budget deficit, but should be put into a separate fund that will be used to pay the public debt, restructure the public sector undertaking, expand the social infrastructure and voluntary pension plans. Once a PSU is privatized, the future profits of that company will be withheld from the government. This could be a huge long-term loss for the profitable USPs. This point should be taken into account in the government disinvestment program. Next is the privatization process must be carried out vigorously and closely monitored. Next is to carry out privatization smoothly, it is necessary to educate the public about the usefulness of these measures. So that is all for today. Hope you have understood the concept of liberalization and privatization. We will meet in another episode with another topic. Till then, take care. Goodbye.